Good morning, Baltimore. It is Monday, August 24th, and thank you for tuning into the latest episode of the Early Birds podcast. I'm your host, Matt Weyrich, alongside columnist Josh Tolentino. Josh, haven't seen you in a little bit. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great, Matt, and I got a good question for you to kick us off here. And I've learned over our podcasting era, to kind of get the best responses for you instead of putting it on our pre-planning a document sheet or discussing it beforehand in our huddle. I'll just throw it out there. So that's a nod to kind of the hurdles and just how we've navigated and learned the ins and outs of this podcast making process. So all right, I'm gonna kick it off here. What is your go-to? Actually, give me a couple. I want to hear more than one option. But what are your go-to karaoke options after we saw a 10 out of 10 performance in, my opinion and probably everyone else's opinion across Ravens flock after they see Jesse Minter taking the mic during team dinner, rapping word for word Eminem, and man, that was just I feel like in a controlled environment, coaches wouldn't want that out there, but just given where we are in society with phones and everything, roster fringe guys, we're going to post that, let alone, guys like Jacoby Lane, a training camp standout, posting his coach for the entire world to see. So I want to hear, what are your go-to karaoke songs?
Yeah, I mean, dude, props to Minter. He absolutely went in. I would definitely do some Lose Yourself. I mean, I know pretty much every word of that song. I could go in there. My go-to at like a party or something like that, very white boy of me, but is All Star by Smash Mouth. I know 100% know every word of that song. My wife has heard it
that song
way
with
too many
Shrek.
times. Yep. Definitely some ties there for me too. And let me think. Probably to close it out would be, man, I love me some Mac Miller. I could do some of that. All American Rejects, Gives You Hell. Yeah, I'd say All American Rejects was like my favorite band in high school. So I'll say Gives You Hell would be my third. I actually have been to a decent amount of like karaoke birthday parties and things like that. So I've gotten to flex the vocal cords a little bit. I'm not very good at singing, but I will, after a few adult beverages, let it loose from time to time.
Man, the All American Rejects. This is gonna reveal a bit, but I can't remember if it was Dirty Little Secret or Move Along. But one of those you definitely
Both great
used to be
songs.
one of those you definitely were my ringtone back in middle school.
Let's go.
So,
On the flip phone?
no, what phone was that? It wasn't.
One of the slide
My
ones,
parents
maybe?
had a Razor. Yeah, I think it was a slide. One of those slide. Man, way back in the day.
Yeah. Okay. I was being accused at the ballpark this week. It was 90s night, and I was being accused of being too Gen Z because I had never seen Boy Meets World. Am I so wrong for that? I'm a 97 baby.
Yeah, see, I'm a 93 baby, and I can get with those who were probably upset with you, and I'd love to hear who it was after we're done recording. But I mean,
It's all on Twitter.
There was so much programming, on Disney and Nickelodeon that I hope you, like, if I were to start spilling out shows, I hope you'd know what like Rocket Power and some of my personal favorites are.
I have not seen Rocket Power, I'll admit.
Oh, all right, now you're just taking the hits now.
But
We're going in the wrong direction.
It's because I was asked who Topanga was, because it was on the screen for like the lookalike cam, and I said, "Isn't she from Full House?"
Okay, now
so I got not a good look for me. Not a good look for me. Jacob was letting me hear it.
Let's just get back on track here, because
But wait,
I
what
feel
is
like
your
I might
song?
say another show. Oh, of course.
We got to hear your song.
So there are multiple videos of me at journalism conferences. I hope they're not that easy to surface, but as recent as like within the past couple of years,
Start Googling.
I mean, a consistent group of friends at this journalism convention. We love to sing NSYNC. I Want It That Way. So
Okay, I know that song.
Either that, some Backstreet. I mean, but those are very traditional. Like that doesn't surprise you at all. So
No.
I was curious to hear. I feel like you and Minard make a good pairing with the white boy rappers Mac Miller, Eminem.
That's right. Yeah, I'll go in with some white boy rappers. No problem. No problem. But yes, in addition to having 90s night at the ballpark, the Orioles also played baseball games this week. They actually had a pretty big AL East swing, playing the Rays over at the Trop last week, and then hosting the Yankees and the Rays for a 10-game stint in which they went 5-5 over that span, playing the top two teams from the division. We're going to talk about everything we saw from this stretch in the homestand here. And then on the back half of the show, we will talk Ravens preseason. They beat the Minnesota Vikings 13-3 on the road to move to 2-0 here in the preseason. We'll talk standouts from that game, grades, things like that. But first, Josh, when you look at the stretch that the Orioles just had, going into it, they actually moved into playoff position at one point in the middle of the stretch, are now 2 games back of the Cleveland Guardians. If scores hold as we are recording here, the Guardians are up on the Rockies. We're going to assume that game goes final. They're 2 games out of a wild card spot now. They go 5-5 in that stretch. Do you feel, all things considered, pretty good about that, considering the 2 teams that they had to play?
This is about what I expected from this stretch, that if they had hit that 500 mark, or, realistically in my head, I thought they were going to win 3-4 games, and, they start out the stretch hot and, hit a thud right there in the middle. This is about what we expected, and I can't say we've learned much about this team, and certainly there's been some roster pieces moving up and down. Anthony Nunez is back with the group. Big Al, Albert Suarez, man, what a king, man! Just to be able to
taking a
the
beating.
Orioles, they gotta fund him a jet or something. He's just been the definition book of a pro throughout the course of the season. But yeah, have not learned much about this Orioles team in terms of these past 10 games. I think if you want to look at it pretty optimistically, is that they did not suffer and go down the drain. Like a 2-8, a 1-9 would have certainly buried them, or would it have? As we continue to always look at these AL standings every day. Again, we have not learned anything, and I think it was like picturesque that the last game of this 10-game stretch is bookended with Shane Baz and another brilliant start from him, and just to not get any run support at all until this 9th inning of this Sunday game at Camden Yards. Just did not learn anything. That's literally been his entire story throughout the year, and certainly he had some struggles from the outset, but has bounced back here over these past couple of months, and again, Sunday was just a very picturesque way of putting it together for them to finish 5-5 with the loss, and Shane Baz not to be supported in any way, shape, or fashion in the run department.
Yep, Shane Baz now averaging 3.19 runs per game this season in terms of run support. That is the 3rd lowest among qualified starters in MLB this season. With the loss that he took, already was leading the majors, but extended his league-leading loss total to 14 losses on the year. He is 4-14 on the year now is Shane Baz, which obviously wins and losses are not, as we know well in today's game, not indicative of how good or bad necessarily a starting pitcher is, and probably shouldn't be held against him, especially in today's age of guys not going as deep into games. But Baz is going relatively deep into games. He's averaging, since he kind of turned his season around in mid-May, averaging over 6 innings per start, has a complete game in there, and really the Orioles have just not been able to provide him really with any run support, getting 1 run on Sunday, only 2 hits, both provided by Colton Cowser, one of which was a solo home run off Brian Baker in that 9th inning. But for this stretch as a whole, they take 3 of 4 from the Rays. They get swept by the Yankees, take 2 of 3 from the Rays again. I'd say overall, in going 500 over any stretch in this American League is considered a success. A 500 team might make the playoffs for that 3rd wild card spot, as the way things are trending right now. So for the Orioles to kind of just stay afloat, that's exactly what they needed to do. They have really struggled against the Yankees. You take away the games that they played against the Yankees this season, they'd only be 1 game under 500, I believe. So for that to kind of be in the way, the Yankees have been a major hurdle. But on the flip side of that, they played really well against the Rays. They got swept by the Rays at home to start the year, and since then they have won 8 of their last 10 games against Tampa Bay. So the Orioles have really had the Rays number. The only team in the American League East with a winning record against Tampa Bay this season are your Baltimore Orioles. So certainly they have shown up for those games. But honestly, I think what we've learned...
The Craig Albernes effect.
Right. Exactly, trying to getting his revenge. Shane Boz too was supposed. I'm pretty sure he's faced the Rays like 3 or 4 times now this year. He's really lined up with them a lot. But what if I could say I've learned anything about these Orioles, it is that they are 100% a team that plays up to their competition and plays down to their competition. If they are going in and playing one of the best teams in the league, like the Dodgers, they can go in and take 2 or 3, but they can also go into a series against the Angels on that same road trip and lose 2 of 3 to a team at the bottom of the standings. So it has really been frustrating from a fan standpoint to watch this team, kind of maddening at times to watch them go out there and play, under expectations and letting teams that they should be better than steal wins away from them. But that is kind of what this team is. I think they have a chance in any baseball game they play because of their starting rotation. It just really depends on if their lineup shows up or not that day. And so far this year, it has been as inconsistent as any team in baseball. However, I will say the Orioles this season have only scored 3 fewer runs than the Rays. So people love to point to the Rays offense and say, oh my gosh, the Rays, they're doing everything right offensively. Screw analytics. They're putting the ball in play, whatever. 3 more runs than the Orioles all year. So that Rays offense has also gone through some inconsistent stretches at times and struggled to kind of, as most teams in this American League have, to score consistently. But these Orioles certainly have had a chance and still have a chance here down the stretch with around 35 games to go.
Yeah, and if you're a fan of this Orioles team, it's got to be one of the most maddening things for them to play up to their competition and how they went on that West Coast trip that you're referring to against the Dodgers, and then for them to win 8 of their last 10 against the Rays after not starting off on the greatest foot against that team, one that Craig Albertez has so much familiarity with. And especially you look at this past week and a half, for them to start 3-0 and them to finish 5-5. I think you take the 5 wins, but after starting 3-0, it just feels like a missed opportunity. And Jacob Calvin Meyer, our colleague, he tweeted this after their latest loss, but it just feels like every single stretch, whatever, it becomes their most important stretch as we finally get here to the inching closer towards the end of the regular season. And certainly we see some positives throughout uneven stretches like this, and Dylan Beavers is a great one to point to, with especially given how Dylan Beavers' season has gone and just kind of the expectations that he entered the season with after getting up here late last season, making his debut and really looking the part of. But the thing is, at baseball and the rest of the league, they certainly catch up to you and your approaches. And Dylan Beavers still executing such a patient approach and even at times an aggressive approach, as we've seen in his walk-off moments here over the past couple of days. So I think you take the growing and the learning for players like Dylan Beavers, but at the same time, as they enter this ever important stretch, we're going to continue saying this over their next final weeks here. Every game, every series is going to be important. Craig Albertez, he said it himself, they're living and dying on every pitch. So just as Michael Elias was leading into the trade deadline, to put it in his own words. But again, you're going to take the learning, the growing moments, the excellent outings from Shane Boz, but the rest of the guys, and I'm looking particularly at their homegrown guys, and I wrote about this in a column this week, that they need to start really consistently showing up here. And that's a big word that's been brought and discussed this week by the manager himself, is that's the consistency piece that this team has yet to been able to find.
Yeah, the consistency is ever elusive for this team, but you mentioned some of the individual performances. I want to talk about 4 players here and kind of rapid fire here, Josh, 30, 60 seconds per guy, just to hit on each one of them. You mentioned Dylan Beavers hit home runs in 3 straight games leading into Saturday, when he then pinch hit and had the walk-off double for the Orioles to give them that win and put them in position to go for a sweep on Sunday. Are you convinced that Dylan Beavers is back after this week?
Yes, I mean, you live and die on what you currently have, and he's certainly like the Tyler O'Neill experiment over this entire season, and where all the blame continued to go on him in recent weeks, and he's might have cooled off here, but just bringing it back to Dylan Beavers. You want to ride this hot streak that he is on, and again, one of the best hitters in the lineup certainly over the past week.
Yeah, I mean, the contact is what you're looking for with Beavers, for him to be able to hit the ball the other way. To what started that whole home run binge was one to the opposite field. It was actually his first career opposite field home run, and then goes and hits two more to the pull side the next 2 days. So encouraging to see that power, but also just him putting the ball in play and making contact. Saw him work a couple of long at-bats on Sunday, even though he didn't reach base. I think there are some encouraging signs there for Beavers. So certainly with no Taylor Ward, excuse me, they are hoping that he can kind of step up and help fill that void in the outfield. Also on Saturday, Orioles broke out the stirrups as inspired by Tyler O'Neill. So maybe that was a little bit part of the magic there too. Pete Alonso, 14-game hitting streak was broken up on Sunday, but certainly an impressive stretch here for the Orioles first baseman. Up to 30 home runs now on the season. Mets fans are starting to really kind of look over and start to feel a little bit jaded that the Mets did not bring him back. Do you consider this contract already a success, Josh?
Certainly, and I think the 30 home runs was the floor for me entering the season, just because he's done it every single season of his pro career, and we're talking full length seasons. And yeah, my mind just went somewhere in the off season. I don't even want to go that way, but yeah, Pete Alonso, he has certainly been everything that they've paid for. And why don't you go ahead and enjoy a cigar? And I find it the best part about all of this is that it blew up. It went pretty viral on social media. The post game moment between him and Rico Garcia sharing a cigar in the home dugout. But the thing is that was not the first time that they've done that this year. It's just one of a few times. So. But a sneak peek into how Pete has adjusted to his time here in Baltimore has certainly been worth the investment in year one.
Yeah, definitely sounds like a camaraderie thing there. And, 4 more years left on this Alonso deal. So certainly the jury is still out for how well that money is going to be in terms of how it's allocated a couple of years down the line. But Pete Alonso's been everything the Orioles hoped he could be here in year one, and truly has been carrying their offense for the better part of the last 2-3 weeks, given how inconsistent some of the guys have been around him. He really, hitting leadoff, hitting home runs, coming through with some big clutch hits in big spots for them. It's really been a massive boost for them, and I think you could safely say that the Orioles are not in this playoff race if not for Pete Alonso. So that in and of itself has made year one of the Alonso experience a success for Baltimore. Felix Bautista made his first rehab appearance on Sunday with Double-A Chesapeake. He touched 97. Shout out to Michael Howes, our trusty reporter who is out there in Bowie covering that appearance. They don't have any StatCast data, so we're going off of the scoreboard gun here. Sometimes that runs a little hot, you have to admit, but certainly encouraging to see him not sitting down at 93, 94, but able to get up to that high velocity. Only thing is his command was not great. Only recorded one out, did not get out of the inning, walked in a run before being pulled. So, Josh, it's his first outing back, first time pitching, and Michael had it at 399 days. Are you concerned at this point with the lack of command, or do you just kind of write that off to first game back?
Nah, not necessarily concerned. I think the most positive thing is that he is back on a mound throwing in competitive games, just given his injury history over these past couple of years. And I think everyone's so focused on the big league team. You gotta remember this Felix Bautista returning to the mound is his also his own individual goal, and they got to work with his body. I mean, that's such a big guy, the mountain as they call him. But if you're viewing it from the Orioles perspective, anything that he gives the Orioles this season should be viewed as a bonus. Certainly not any sort of rescue plan. I think that might fit more in the likes of a Blaze Alexander, just given that he was one of their best offensive hitters, best guys in the lineup when he's healthy. Felix, it's been so long that, as long as he's getting back to the mound, as he's continuing his progress, I think you just got to root for the health there before the production, especially given where we are in the season. Expecting him to be any sort of rescue plan, I feel like, is unfair.
Yeah, and unfortunately, with the state of the Orioles bullpen right now, not having a true closer, there is maybe some faint hope that he could step in and be that guy, but obviously a lot of boxes to check off before he could get to that point. And, with Ryan Helsley still not throwing off of a mound in his throwing progression, you have to start to wonder if he's going to make it back in time for the end of the regular season. Obviously, with AAA season ending a little bit earlier than the MLB calendar, there's also the potential for him not to be able to get into rehab games in time time, might have to go down to Florida and throw simulated games there. So a question mark for Helsley. It looks like we will be seeing Felix Bautista at some point here before the end of the year, but what he looks like at this point is anybody's guess. Last player here, Josh, I have Carlos Narvaez hitting .079 since being acquired from the Boston Red Sox in the Adley Rutschman trade. Obviously, not very potent offensive production. He has gotten rave reviews from a game calling standpoint, is working with pitchers and how he's kind of been thrown in the fire there. That's certainly what the Orioles were expecting from him, is the defensive side and being able to make an impact there. But from an offensive standpoint, you have Samuel Basallo back from injury now. He hits a home run on Saturday in pinch hit fashion, tying that game, certainly making his presence felt on Sunday, throwing out a couple of guys. But for Narvaez, we're going to see a lot of him. They're carrying 3 catchers, especially right now. You expect to see a lot of him behind the plate. Do you think there's going to be any kind of impact on terms of their offense from him here down the stretch or even moving forward?
If you're expecting him, who Carlos Narvaez, in terms of coming in here and providing an impact, I think you're setting your expectations way too high. And I know the optics of it from moving on from Adley. It's who was known as that offensive as known as that offensive battery in the lineup. Just what he's done over his career is a bit unfair, because I mean it was such focused on the prospect return. I think adding Narvaez to the package was a bonus, in my opinion, for them to be able to get someone who can rotate there with Samuel Basallo as a daily catcher. So that trade was about the future, and I think expecting Narvaez to provide anything in production is just kind of out of this world. But still, we got to acknowledge that hitting below 100 is not enough. And I believe his OPS is sitting around 200 since he's been here in an Orioles uniform. So you want to see it go up slightly, but expecting it to be anything life-changing, I think you're setting your expectations too high. I'd expect him to be cemented in that 8 or 9 spot in the lineup.
Yeah, Narvaez, worth mentioning, had a 726 OPS with the Red Sox last year, 100 OPS plus. So the hope is that he can be a league average hitter. He's done it before. That was a 118 game sample last year. Really struggled with the Red Sox offensively getting out of the gate this season, and obviously really has gotten worse here with the Orioles. Only a 15 game sample size for Narvaez, so nothing to freak out about necessarily, nothing to draw conclusions from. But certainly with the catcher position, you are going to be counting on offense from Samuel Basallo and a high defensive floor from Narvaez. Anything you get from the offensive perspective, like you said, probably a bonus. All right, Josh, any final words here on the Orioles before we switch over to Ravens?
Let's see if they can get some magic off the team that they have been dominating here over their last 10 games against the Rays. And I'm talking about how their win streak started, stealing those 3 games in Tampa off the Rays, coming off a 9-game road win streak. That can the Orioles imitate that somehow over the final stretch, and certainly you'll be bringing us a lot of that coverage over their last 2 cities, getting over to the West Coast and then to Denver. So let's see what we learn over this next stretch. My guess is not going to be much, especially, we talk about how they play up to the competition. The competition that they're facing is not the best of the best in their divisions and league. So I feel like the middling Orioles is, what we're going to continue here throughout this ride.
Yep, we got the Cardinals, the A's, and the Rockies here for the Orioles on this upcoming 3-city road trip. 3, like you said, winnable series for Baltimore. I will be in Sacramento and Denver there for those 2 series, so a bunch of coverage from there. Jacob will have us covered in St. Louis, as we see whether these Orioles can kind of gain any ground as they get into September, when there's a lot of AL East games. They play the Milwaukee Brewers in that month. They have to go over to Queens, play the Mets. So certainly they'd like to be able to make up some ground here against 3 teams in this road trip that you would expect the Orioles to hang around with. But like we said, they've tended to play down to their competition, play up to their competition, so we will see what version of the Orioles travels west here as they embark on this final 3-city road trip of the season. All right, let's talk some Ravens. Okay, Josh. So 13-3 was the final score for the Ravens. Only 6 points allowed for Baltimore here over its first two preseason games, playing very good defense against both the Eagles and now the Vikings on the road. They had joint practices all leading up to this. The big news that Sam touched on in our last episode, Danny Pinter getting carted off, opening up the door at that center position. We saw some Ethan Posich, some Jovan Gwynn at the center spot. So let's start on the offensive line here. What kind of stood out to you about that group, in particular the center spot with no Danny Pinter now in the mix?
Yeah, what stood out is that they were up against a Brian Flores defense, so scoring wasn't necessarily at a premium as it was against Philadelphia.
What was with
Go
all
ahead.
the stunts and the crazy looks that Brian Flores giving in a preseason game? It felt like a little bit like, all right, man, like we're playing preseason football here.
Yeah,
Is that just me?
No. Just definitely not just you. I mean, but that's who Brian Flores is, and as someone who's covered him up close before when he was a head coach in Miami. This is who Flo is. It doesn't matter if it's the preseason. Yeah, everyone loves using the term with coordinators and keeping their scheme vanilla in the preseason. And the Ravens have somewhat. We've seen some certainly new schemes and packages, but not necessarily everything that they've been running in practice during these two preseason games. So keeping it very vanilla. If we're talking about ice cream here, Brian Flores, he's getting the most exotic flavors with the sprinkles and all your mix-ins and toppings. So, but getting back to your question about the offensive line. So, given that they were up against that in a loud environment, I don't care if it was a preseason game, that is one of the loudest stadiums in the NFL, and you saw glimpses of that. Certainly not the loudest it has been, and it's standing there, but for a preseason game, that is a difficult environment to play in. So you wanted to see how the centers that they have in place behind Pinter, and specifically with Gwynn, he had such a stellar debut, and he hasn't necessarily stood out throughout training camp outside of being the default number 2 center. He kind of definitely fell back to earth, and so did pieces around him. Gerard Lichtenhan, he had 3 flags after he looked pretty good last season. He's going to be one of their main reserve tackles with Carson Vincent, and then even Vega Ioane, and he did not commit a single penalty last season, not a single holding penalty during his 2 seasons at Penn State when he was one of the best offensive linemen in the country. On the first series, he gets flagged for his first hold, and some guys were pointing to that Lichtenhan was at fault for that in terms of giving up leverage and losing his guy immediately. But regardless, it was more so a bringing back to earth moment guy for Vega Ioane. I thought it was good for this offensive line to go up against Brian Flores' defense here in week 2. We saw the respect factor from Jesse Minter as a known defensive guy, and that's why he's been brought here to Baltimore, is to fix this defense. All the praise that he offered for his opposing coordinator in Brian Flores, opposing play caller. And so I thought it was a good test for them, but really just ramping up here. I think it's going to be Ethan Pocich's show to lose, and certainly just shaping up the week. We've got 2 days of practice here in Owings Mills, Monday and Tuesday, and then Wednesday the big joint practice against the Commanders. I think this is really around the time that Ethan Pocic is expected to ramp up in terms of his reps and his fight for this starting center job, especially after a less than stellar showing from Jovan Gwynn.
Yeah, I mean, having Danny Pinter there, who had largely looked good in camp and was starting to, I think, show why the Ravens were kind of giving him the starting nod at center. Even with bringing in Pocic, it kind of gave them the ability to ramp him up slowly and play to his timeline. And they're still obviously going to be careful with that coming off of an Achilles, but now you need him. You've gotten to a point here where with Pinter down, you're going to have to rely on Pocic kind of right out of the gate. So what he looks like here as he kind of gets more and more snaps, more and more work with the first team offense, what that looks like is going to be very interesting to see. So certainly some test here for this offensive line depth, a group that already had plenty of questions going into the offseason. They go out and they draft Vega Ioane. They make a couple of moves on the interior. They bring in John Simpson as well as Jovan Gwynn and Pocic. Pinter is the guy who all of a sudden is kind of standing out in camp, and now they're going to have to see what their off-season acquisitions are truly made of right out of the gate. So we will see how that kind of progresses here over the next week. Let's look at the quarterback position, Josh. Snoop Huntley comes out a little bit rusty at first, not really a great first couple of plays, but I thought he kind of settled in there and then started to show why he is the QB2 for this team after last season kind of being relegated back to QB3.
Yeah, he certainly did, and with Snoop Huntley, he's always been known as a better game day quarterback than practice player. That we've discussed this many times before, and really from the first, I'm remembering back several weeks now when we got to Owings Mills for the first few days of training camp, and you certainly notice the drop off whenever Snoop Huntley is in there, and it was a talking point throughout those early practices is that Snoop has not looked great from the pocket, not making the best decisions, not making the best timely decisions, and that has certainly carried over into these preseason games. But we've seen time and time again Snoop Huntley come in and save this team and be the again, that savior type figure for this team in spots when Lamar has been hurt in the past. And this is not just one sample season's worth. We're not just referring to the back end of last season with Lamar going through those injuries. This is multiple seasons worth. And, in the rookie's case, and I'm talking about undrafted quarterback out of Kentucky, Kentucky, undrafted quarterback out of Connecticut. I'm mixing the Huskies there with the Big Blue. Let me just continue. Joe Fagnano, he has been so impressive, man. For him to have, I believe it's a 78% completion percentage over these past two games. Really, his only mistake was in a tight red zone pressure situation with him rolling to his right, throwing across his body when he had two underneath options last week against the Philadelphia Eagles. That's really his only mistake and throughout this entire preseason. Just, I believe, 10 incompletions. The completion percentage is sky high, almost 80%. And, obviously not as many touchdowns coming through, but for him to have that highlight touchdown to LeJontay Wester against a zone look where LeJontay, he ran an out route to the left sideline, and Joe Fagnano to sling it over there. Very crisp route, very crisp execution. Joe Fagnano going through his reads there. And again, he just looks calm and decisive. And I don't think that he's pushing, Snoop Huntley's door down, and that, this is going to be Snoop's one-way ride out of town. I think Snoop, they saw, this front office saw with Eric DeCosta last year with Cooper Rush, and then what they got with the energy boost that they got with Snoop Huntley. I don't think that they're ready to say goodbye yet to Snoop. If anything, this is such a great opportunity for Joe Fagnano that he's developing these relationships with this team inside this locker room that ultimately I do believe that the Ravens he's going to end up one of the guys that end up cutting this upcoming weekend with roster cut down day on Sunday, but certainly an open invitation to come back and join that practice squad to be their practice squad quarterback and their emergency third string quarterback on game days for Joe Fagnano if he's not already putting himself up in a place to get an opportunity elsewhere with all the footage and all the just consistency that he's brought from that third depth spot.
Yeah, I mean, talk about an opportunity that he's been able to take advantage of. They bring in Skylar Thompson to kind of be that QB3. He gets hurt. Diego Pavia comes in at the same time as him. Throwback to that quick fad in Ravens world with him kind of coming in and all the fanfare around him. It turns out to be Fagnano, the guy they end up keeping, and that's looking like to be the right choice. I mean, I think he has made a couple of risky throws over the middle like that you were kind of describing, moving to his right and then going back over the middle. He's had a couple where he's kind of fit that in terms of dump-off passes and in tight windows, but overall, hard to argue with that completion percentage. We'll see if he, kind of develops to start pushing the ball a little bit farther downfield. Felt like there were a good amount of checkdowns and first read type things. We'll see as kind of the season goes on and the development, what that looks like for Fagnano. Obviously not somebody who necessarily fits the prototypical mold of this offense and what Lamar does, but, there's only going to be so many quarterbacks of Lamar's ilk or the light version of that in which what Tyler Huntley is. You're going to have a mobile quarterback a little bit from time to time and somewhere on that depth chart, and that is Fagnano for this team. So very intrigued by what we've seen so far this year. all things work out, he never sees the field for the Ravens in 2026, but certainly a guy where if they do get farther down the depth chart at some point this year, you do start to wonder if we maybe see him at some point this year if Snoop Huntley does not fill in relief as expected. So certainly some encouraging stuff from both the signal callers there. Let's go over on the defensive side here. Keandre Jackson, maybe the biggest defensive standout of the day, did have a penalty, but also racked up 8 tackles, a guy who figures to factor into this secondary mix. How do you kind of see him filling, what kind of role do you see him filling among the DBs this season, Keandre Jackson?
Matt, don't consider me surprised when it comes to Keandre Jackson, and this is for our viewers on YouTube. This is where he went to school, Matt. Illinois State. So let's just get that out of the way.
Represented.
Yeah, of course, we share that alumni. But man, just on a serious note with Keandre Jackson, he brings the juice, and we certainly saw both sides and contrast of that in this latest preseason game, Minnesota, where I believe it was in Minnesota last year during the regular season, where that was when the Ravens were in that. We all know how they started last year, but this was the middle stretch when they were enjoying that success and kind of that positive regression. Keandre Jackson, he had a huge forced fumble on kickoff coverage last year, so he just loves playing in Minnesota. This most recent game, he finishes with 8 tackles, but again, we saw the contrast of his juice and energy, and he brings that every single time he steps on the field, and you're certainly going to take that. You're going to take the energy and coach it up. But again, we saw both sides of it in terms of he was flagged for, I believe it was an interference call on a fair catch. So you got to preserve that inner energy and, play with that edge, but not go, in his words, after the game, a podium day for Keandre Jackson. He said you can't go off the edge with all that juice and mentality that he brings. So how he fits in this defensive back room, I don't think that he's necessarily going to force his way onto the field if it ideally plays out with how the Ravens want it to. You look at that safety depth chart, you've got Kyle Hamilton leading off, followed by Malachi Starks and Jalen Hawkins, a key offseason addition. And you can't just look at Kyle Hamilton as a safety, as we've learned throughout the course of his historic, for him to be the highest paid safety, but is he really a safety, when it comes to that and how Jesse Minter will deploy him? We see him all over the field. So really it's coming down to Malachi Starks and Jalen Hawkins to hold it down there. I don't think Keandre Jackson is pushing any of them for playing time, but for them to know that he does bring that juice, he does bring that energy. And the team had an interesting clip that they had a Malachi Starks and Keandre Jackson film review session. So is that a key, or is that an indicator of where the team is on him? And I know the team operations and their media side, they operate as separate entities, but still for them to have him part of that project, I think was telling, and it just shows to his development and where he is at with the organization after carving out his own as one of a roster bubble guys. He wasn't even on the bubble to begin last season. He was at the very bottom of the depth chart and forced his way through performances like this past Saturday. He was having those flashes throughout last preseason, ultimately cut, put on practice squad, and then stuck it through and waited to get elevated to the active roster later in the season. But again, I don't think there's necessarily a fit for him in the defensive back room. His main production is going to come through special teams, which we saw here this past Saturday.
Yeah, and that's what I was about to say is can't we be remiss not to mention his special teams impact from last year, blocking PATs and recovering fumbles on special teams, certainly making a lot of big plays there and earning a lot of praise from not just teammates, but analysts and things like that over his play on special teams. So really valuable guy in that regard, and also a potential depth option, somebody who, you never want to be in a position where you're having to play without Kyle Hamilton, but certainly somebody who could rotate in and get some opportunities here in this safety room among this DB group as the season goes on. Another big standout and one guy who really stood out to me in this game, Ethan Burke. You want to talk about undrafted free agents making a push for the roster. This year's Keandre Jackson could be Ethan Burke, who had 2 pass breakups, a sack, and really played a big role in helping stuff the run game here. Talk to me about Ethan Burke, Josh. What has stood out to you about what he brings to the table on the defensive side of the ball?
Yeah, before the preseason started, Matt, I gave a list of undrafted guys to watch in a column, and Ethan Burke was right there near the top. And the first thing I wrote is that you notice his size. He's 6'6", almost 270 pounds as an edge rusher, but then he just starts throwing people around. And I'm talking about on kickoff coverage. We saw it on defense and his ability to set the edge in the run game. And then for him to lead the team in pass breakups as a defensive lineman or someone who's always playing at the line of scrimmage, I think that told you a lot right there, and just his ability and instincts to get to make use of his long frame and get his hands in throwing lanes in the picture. He's certainly more than a big body, and that I think he's understanding how to use his length that he's reached at this pro level. Again, he's going up against backups of other teams, so you want to always consider that in the picture. But certainly making his own case to make the roster, or maybe he's like a Keandre Jackson case where they're developing a relationship now. There's no room for him on the 53. They want to bring him back on the practice squad roster and potentially for later game day elevations when needed, because he's certainly providing a large enough sample size here over these past couple games. And Jesse Minter, I'm sure, is very pleased with his development. And Anthony Levine Sr., the special teams coordinator, man, when I asked him about Ethan Burke, his first reaction was, oh man, like before he provided an answer that raved about him and wanting to see him get it done on game days. So I'm sure the coaching staff has been pleased, and maybe Eric DeCosta not necessarily too pleased, because he loves for his undrafted guys to go under the radar. That's Eric DeCosta's approach to this, this final week, is like, how can we keep them hidden, know that they have the potential, but keep them hidden enough that we'd be able to add them back through the roster, guys who've slipped through the cracks. So I'm sure Eric DeCosta is continuing to think about that over these next several days leading up to cut down day next Sunday.
100%. Certainly a guy who has stood out in multiple games here so far in the preseason. One guy who had a quiet first game, Josh, I wanted to talk about. We don't have him on our list, so I'm maybe putting you on the spot, but we got to talk about Mike Green, who back-to-back plays, really impressive, gets his first sack of the preseason, working along the edge, forces his way inside with a nice move to get the sack there, and then right the play right after that, draws a holding penalty, working to the outside, and is able to knock down, I believe it was Carson Wentz was in the game at that point, knock down the quarterback there. Maybe it was Brosmer, I can't remember exactly, but was able to get to the QB on back-to-back plays there, showing the versatility of being able to work to the outside and the inside. Looked really fast, which I thought was impressive, and certainly a guy who kind of disappeared in that first preseason game. It was nice to see a sighting from Mike Green.
Yeah, and for Mike Green to be playing into the fourth quarter of last week's game was a slight cause for concern. But as he's going through that sequence, the sack and then drawing the hold. First, you look at the sack. It's an inside-outside move, and then at the very end, he executes his that's his signature thing, is his bend. And we've talked about it many times before, but I'm forgetting the offensive tackle that he was up against. But for him to execute it in that spot was, and knowing that was his move in that spot to get to the quarterback. Kudos to Mike Green, and then again for his presence there and just what he, the physicality and also the athleticism that he showed on that rep, for him to be able to win the next rep by drawing that penalty. You're going to take that from your second-year pass rusher, who, again, you kind of see where he is on the depth chart there, behind Trey Hendrickson, behind Tavius Robinson, who enters a big contract year. But for Mike Green, again, to get those highlights in consecutive fashion. And then the biggest thing for me when it came to Mike Green was that he was in street clothes, I believe, in the second half. So for that kind of shows to you where he is on that depth chart. Just another relatable thing on that end is that you saw Devontae Walker playing into the second half and Jacoby Lane in street clothes. He changed at halftime. So it kind of shows you the pecking order and what the coaches are thinking. So very positive sign for Mike Green to have those highlights, and then for him to get some rest there in the second half.
Yeah, and let's talk about also the wide receivers here. Speaking of guys who were not playing in the second half, Jacoby Lane comes out working with the starters there, not playing in the second half. Meanwhile, Elijah Surratt we don't see until the third quarter, and Tez Walker playing late into the second half as well. Do you feel like this kind of wide receiver 3 competition is, I don't want to say wraps, but it's starting to look that way in terms of a preference for Jacoby Lane over the other two?
Yeah, and I know Jacoby Lane has had so many standout performances in practice, but after the first one, I said it right there that he is a lead on this wide receiver third spot, and he certainly held on to it. Didn't necessarily have any highlight moments in this game, but the fact that, again, he was not dressed in the second half tells you plenty much about where he stands on this roster pecking order. And then, again, a bit of news here as we discuss the wide receiver position. Rashad Bateman, with his arrest coming to light over these past few days, and Jesse Minter, standing on the team's statement and them that they're cooperating with the NFL in their investigation. So how does that mix up? And does Rashad face any type of potential suspension from the NFL? The only time will tell on that matter, and how that affects the wide receiver room. But that's another thing that you have to think about as they're constructing this roster. On the back end of it, you look at LeJontay Wester. Certainly, I wouldn't necessarily say that he was on straight, standing on top of that bubble, but he was getting closer there just because he has not provided much as a wide receiver. And really his primary responsibilities have been kick and punt returning since since he was a draft pick last year coming out of the University of Colorado. We saw that took a big stall in his confidence just going way down last year, Matt. I believe it was week 11 against the Cleveland Browns. He had a couple muffed punts. One of them occurred that gave the Browns possession in their own in the red zone. Then we didn't see him return many kicks after that over the final 2 months of the season. So we definitely saw some juice from him in the return game against the Vikings. And then again, we discussed this earlier, his connection with Joe Fagnano on that 8-yard out route, which led to his first touchdown of the preseason. I think he's got that fifth spot wrapped up. So I guess we'll see again between Tez and Surratt how that shakes out here over these final 3 practices.
Yeah, certainly a bit surprising for Surratt to see him not getting into the game as early as he did, and certainly don't want to make light of the Bateman situation, which is obviously very serious in a family domestic matter. Misdemeanor charges brought to the table here. So league spokesperson told Baltimore Sun or putting out a statement, the matter's under review, so we'll see what that means for Bateman, what that means for the Ravens moving forward. It's something that the team has been aware of since it occurred, so kind of interesting that we're just kind of finding out about it now, and that he was practicing and going through the entire preseason while dealing with this. Now, players are able, while court decisions are pending, able to participate with teams, and that's up to the team's discretion whether to place them on leave or not. So the Ravens ultimately made that decision, but that is something that is certainly going to bear watching here as we move forward. On the field, certainly for Jacoby Lane, that could mean an opportunity to be the number 2 guy in this offense. And, when you talk about, having 12 personnel or 2 tight ends on the field, that's where you want to be the number 2 receiver to really be super involved, and that's where you might be seeing some more Jacoby Lane here earlier than expected if something were to happen with Bateman. But also just to be that number 3 wide receiver here after being drafted in the 3rd round, a really encouraging camp that we've seen from him, and somebody we fully expect to be very involved with this offense here as the season gets rolling. Josh, anything else here on the Vikings game? We've got a couple of joint practices coming up with the Commanders. Preseason finale will be on Friday. We got Sunday is the day that the Ravens have to make final cuts. So as you kind of look ahead to this week, look at this last game, anything else that stands out to you?
Yeah, just really looking for. It's going to be an exciting week that we finally got here to the end of the preseason, and the joint practices is really where we get the most juice and energy. So, Sam and I weren't able to get up to Minnesota last week. They had a couple joint practices in Minnesota, but this is where we see the ones. This is where we see the last stretch of Lamar Jackson against external competition. Before Indianapolis, because certainly he is not dressing up in Friday's game against the Commanders, which maybe Jaden Daniels will. He has been playing throughout the preseason with Stephon Diggs, Terry McLaurin, and the rest of their starters. So we're certainly getting that due up here on Wednesday. Couldn't be more excited to break it down with all of you guys, and continue to like and support our podcast. We got Sam Cohn coming on with you on Wednesday after that joint practice to give you all that recap from up there in Owings Mills.
Yep, absolutely. Looking forward to that. We'll do a Ravens roster projection on Wednesday, so super pumped there. And also just want to shout out Sam with the Zion Young interview. I did a great job. It was a really fun part of last episode. So if you haven't checked that out, make sure to go back and give that a listen, give that a watch. We've received a lot of great feedback from that interview, so hope you all enjoyed. As he said, like and subscribe. Give the show 5 stars on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you guys get your podcasts. And don't forget to give us a follow on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, everywhere else on social at Sun Early Birds. He's Josh Tolentino. I'm Matt Weyrich. Thank you all so much for listening, and have a good one.